The first part of the first assault of Achille Marozzo begins by saying that you start in Guardia di Testa, and when you observe your opponent in Porta di Ferro Alta, that's important, when you see that guard, that you are to throw a falso imputanto to the outside of his sword. Not only just throw it, but he says this word, this falciare, which we take to mean to deceive beneath his sword. And this is to the outside of it, because you see him in that guard. What is a falso imputanto? He definitely does not describe it here. Marozzo describes it in various places, and we're going to talk about that right now. Also, you will see that Anonimo Bolognese is the other Bolognese master to mention that technique, and he describes it good enough in like a dozen different places. So you have to look at Anonimo as well. In the 116th chapter of Marozzo, he describes a falso imputanto, and it is a play of sword and targa, so a small shield. So if you have your targa in front of you in this guard of Codalunga Alta, he says to make a falso imputanto. He says, take your sword over your targa almost to sopra il braccio, almost. Sopra il braccio is this position here, but he says almost, not that far. Raise it over your targa. And then you're to step forward, extending your arm. And then as you do so, turn your right wrist upward. And that is a falso imputanto. He says also thrusting that. So he says one other important thing in chapter, I believe it's 95, where he says that you will throw a falso imputanto to the inside of your opponent's sword. So if you take that sort of advice here, again, now being delivered from the other side, that you'll lift your hand. And again, the idea is that it's the true edge is turned toward. If you look at the previous example, when he said to bring it over here, your true edge is facing your enemy. And then you turn your wrist upward with a falso-like thrust. Now, and he doesn't say to bring it all the way to here, which would result in initially a tondo, a horizontal. He says bring it almost, which means I'm here. And so this is descending on what line? The reverso line, the squalembrato line. When I turn my wrist, the sword will go horizontally as a tondo. That's what he says later in the play for the one-handed sword, that he says, throw a falso imputanto from this position into the inside of your opponent's sword. He says, throw a falso imputanto, that is a tondo. So a falso imputanto, he says, is a tondo. Now, he doesn't mean it's a falso tondo, but he means that it's first thrown on the squalembrato line, and then when you turn your wrist, it goes on the tondo line, the horizontal. So all of that gives you an understanding of what he means when he says, when you see this opponent in this guard, that you deceive a falso imputanto beneath their sword, stepping your left and your right foot. So the first action is a falso imputanto. Like he says in chapter 116, I bring this over to my left side with my true edge facing my opponent. This appears to be what? What does it look like in his perspective? And what would he do about it? What would he do about it? Right. I am creating a reaction. I'm making a provocation. He sees this. He knows what he thinks is coming. But I will deceive beneath that on the horizontal line, followed immediately by another attack with another step. He says, do this stepping your left and right legs forward. These aren't sideways. That's something else to understand, is the measure. This specifically is gioco largo. What does that mean functionally? Let's start out by talking about what is stretta di mezza spada. Stretta di mezza spada, the closest measure, is where we are crossed in the middle of our swords, and with a single step, I can reach my opponent. Gioco stretto is one step further out from that, where I can take one step to get to the sword and a second step to reach the target. Gioco largo, therefore, is another step out. We're talking about 3 steps away. And if you don't get that, you should read what Anonimo Bolognese has to say about that, because he makes it quite clear. So, from gioco largo, this does not work if we start here. I take 2 steps forward, and even then, I am not within striking range. Falso imputanto, deceiving beneath with 1 step, and then stepping again with another step. Down here, why would I end down here? If we're in fighting range, that would be very dangerous. This is an invitation, meaning what I just did was to get him to attack me. There is no other reason I would end in that guard. Now, what is the second attack? Okay, here, this, there's a little bit of uncertainty here, but what he says is, I throw this falso imputanto beneath his, in a deceptive way, stepping with 1 foot, and then he says, throw a mandrito con un tramazzone. So a mandrito with a tramazzone can be read that way. Or it can also be read through a mandrito by a tramazzone, meaning in the manner of. I prefer that reading of it because it makes more sense. If you'd rather throw 2 of them, that's fine. But if you look at how the falso imputanto looks, if I make the falso imputanto, stepping with 1 foot, and this turns here and goes beneath the opponent's blade, this turns easily over into a tramazzone-like mandrito. A mandrito by tramazzone. A mandrito in the manner of a tramazzone. Marzo does say that on occasion. If, however, I make the falso imputanto, and I then have to uncover myself and go through a high guard to throw the mandrito, and then to throw a tramazzone, well, I could do that. That is a lot, and while possible, doesn't seem very conducive to my actions here. You can do that. However, it's much more natural to simply make the mandrito in the manner of a tramazzone, which would look like this, that. You see, and how I end here, I'm trying to get my opponent to attack me because that's what we do. So many times in Bolognese fencing, the objective is to try to get the other person to attack you first. They say so outright. This becomes that, which becomes this and that. Here and here. Okay, watch again. We'll get to more detail on the rest of it in a second. Starting from guardi di testa. Turn your courage toward your opponent, lifting this over your left side. Throw a descending action with your true edge, in which you will turn your right wrist into a horizontal position going beneath. Make a tramazzone-like mandrito, stepping forward down to here. When he attacks, step your front foot to your left into guardi di entrare with your point in the face. Step your next foot to throw a reverso fendente toward the head. If he parries that, comes at you, draw your front foot back, point in the face in guardi di crocchie, crossed arm parry. Step your right foot back the span of 2 palms. Bring a falso dritto, sending your left leg behind that, returning to porta di ferro alto. So, if my opponent is in porta di ferro alto, remember that is the guard I'm looking for, and I am starting in gioco largo. My 2 steps that I make will be forward, he says. These aren't sideways steps. If I throw something on the outside of his Porta di Ferro alta, whatever it might be, is he going to just do nothing? Simply not respond to me and allow me to do whatever I want to him? Of course not. It's the natural thing for somebody to do, no matter what I do over here, when he's in that guard. And this is going specifically to the outside of his guard. So whatever I do, he's going to react. And if it looks like this, he's going to want to use his forte against what that looks like. He's going to raise that and cross his arms. Meaning, if this is a falso imputanto, as Monozzo described it, that when I turn my right wrist, I'll be going beneath his sword as he goes to defend himself. I step forward straight once, falso imputanto, that deceives beneath. And now this could be a mandrito and a tramazzone. I tend toward thinking that it is not, but it could be. A falso imputanto with a step that deceives, and I step again with a mandrito in the manner of a tramazzone with another step. This and that, and I'm down here. Now he attacks my head. Parry. I step my right foot to my left side, and this is on my true edge, and my point is in the face, and I'm using my forte. This is guardi di entrare. Then I step my left foot to my left with a reverso fendente, making my right foot go behind that. Now he does say, in the lowering of my sword, he may parry if he parries that, and if he throws something at my head. So there's a moment where I need to watch out for an attack. I will strongly cross my arms, parrying that with my point in his face, drawing my left foot back near my right. This looks like guardi di croce, doesn't it? He does call for that specifically in some later parts of this first assault. So there. This to make him do that so that I can do this. And did I really, at this range, intend to strike him? Or did I go into this low position to get him to commit to attacking me so I can put my point in his face and hit him with that reverso pendente? If he attacks me still, I block that. And this goes back to the span of 2 palms, about a foot. The other foot goes behind that with a falso dritto to the hands that puts me into Porta di Ferro alta.